upon your servants who bear office in this land the spirit of charity and justice, that we may in all things walk before you with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in our several offices through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. O Lord, you are the lover of justice and truth. Give your grace to our Parliament and to all who direct the affairs of our nation, and guide us by your Holy Spirit, we pray, that by word and deed we may promote the well-being of your people and set forth peace among all people through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us sum our prayers up in the words our Lord himself has taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Messages from Her Excellency the President.
I have a message from Her Excellency the President to the Honourable the Senate, which reads as follows. Her Excellency the President hereby informs the Honourable the Senate of the following. Section 28A(1) of the Emergency Management Act, Cap 160A, states that where the President is satisfied that an emergency has arisen as a result of a person or an animal having a communicable disease or a notifiable disease, the President may, by proclamation, on the advice of the Prime Minister, after the Prime Minister has consulted or has been advised by the Chief Medical Officer, declare that a public health emergency exists. Her Excellency hereby informs the Honourable the Senate that in accordance with Section 28A(3) of the said Cap 160A, she has declared a public health emergency. Signed by the President at State House, 24th of March, 2022.
Announcements by Your Honour. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of papers.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the following document, Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries, Remuneration and Allowances, Order 2022.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motion relating to the business or sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister. Introduction of bills. Public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the following bill be read a first time, Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries, Remuneration and Allowances, Order 2022.
The question is that the bill so mentioned be read first time.
Order number 2, sir.
Order number 2.
In the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of the resolution. The legislative and parliamentary secretary.
Oh, yeah.
Remuneration and allowances for 20.
The Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a first time, and I wish to introduce the bill. It is a money bill. It has also been certified as a money bill, and so on that basis, second. Mr. President, this is a money resolution, as I was starting to say just now, before I had to take a bit of a briefing on the changes to be made under the bill, under the resolution, which is so-called Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries Conditions of Service Order. Mr. President, you would recall that in the immediate aftermath of the 2018 general election, we had a number of ministers that constituted the cabinet covering a range of ministries. At the time, Mr. President, we were treating to a country that was facing a fiscal crisis, a financial crisis, and recessionary conditions, and all the things that went along with it. You heard our Honourable Prime Minister speak about many hands making light work, and the need for us to be able to ensure that the business of the government and the recovery of our country was spread among many people in order to be able to deliver. Mr. President, we are now at 2022. We have since gone through a second election in 2022, and the Prime Minister has made it clear that despite the fiscal crisis of 2018, the Michel government successfully managed to be able to wrestle to the ground, despite being thrown all the things that we all know have happened in the intervening period between 2018 and 2022, that we now have been able to weather the storms in a way that has put us in a position, one, to enjoy the confidence once more of the public of Barbados, but secondly, to be able to restructure the way in which we treat to the management of our affairs at the level of our cabinet. Mr. President, I wish to also refer your attention to the way in which Prime Minister constituted that cabinet when she announced the cabinet's appointments, and she made the determination that there needed to be a tiering of how we treated to the management of the country. Now, Mr. President, I don't think that I need to say to you or to the country that over the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years between the 2018 and the 2022 election, that most of Barbados, and certainly in my own role as Minister of Tourism, people around the world say to me all the time, how does your Prime Minister do it? Does she sleep? She is on top of everything, everywhere, at all times, and we have seen her once again over the past few days doing us proud in the United Arab Emirates, where she is opening today our newest embassy in the UAE to make sure that Barbados continues to have that international presence. But Mr. President, the business of the government must continue, and Barbados must enjoy both an international and a regional presence as well as one here at home. And the business of government in all its facets, Mr. President, must always ensure that there is experienced leadership as well as new eyes and fresh partners. And Mr. President, I think that we are very confident that our Prime Minister has continued to pilot our country through some of the most difficult times. I know certainly I would not have wanted to go through the difficulties of the last 3.5 years under any leader who came from on the other side over the previous administration in a way that we have been able to conquer it in this last term under the Barbados Labour Party and under the leadership of Mia Amor Motley. We can credit where we are today, Mr. President, where we are talking about recovery in a post-pandemic environment, very much to her leadership of this country. Mr. President, I also want to make the point that the Cabinet constitutes, and I certainly in my own ministry have had this conversation on more than one occasion. We have a country, Mr. President, where we talk about having a population crisis. We have a country, Mr. President, where we talk about the need for us to embrace our experienced leadership with our youthful leadership. We have a country, Mr. President, that talks about bringing fresh eyes and taking fresh guard. And that is what constitutes the construct of our cabinet, Mr. President. We have, for the first time in our country, the leadership of senior ministers who come with the benefit of experienced eyes at the level of political leadership, as well as how ministries and governments are run. Mr. President, it is an interesting thing, and I say this here openly and honestly. When I first left the University of the West Indies as a young student, bright-eyed and starry-eyed, and I wanted to change the world and do all kinds of things in the world, and I went into my first job as a young graduate of international relations and diplomacy into the Foreign Service, there were so many things that university could not have taught me about how government works. I didn't know how to write a diplomatic note, Mr. President. I didn't know how to communicate across government. I didn't know the role of ministries and what a permanent secretary was. Those are not things that you learn from on the outside of government. And even now, as we grow through the process of managing governance and we listen to the conversations, it is very clear in our country that there absolutely must be civics education and civic education on how our country works and how the arms and the institutions of government work, because it is very clear that so many still need to benefit from that exposure and that understanding that those of us who came through the government service at any level have been able to benefit from. And so the importance of experienced eyes, experienced hands who understand the mechanisms of governance and government and how it works is very much incorporated in the structure of senior ministers, in particular, since our cabinet, as the country also knows, brings that balance between youthful, new, fresh eyes and skills alongside experience. And so we have persons who have joined our cabinet, myself included, who joined us 2.5 years ago, and others, one of whom is in this place as minister in the Prime Minister's office with daily responsibility for a number of things, who in combination with our senior ministers benefit from bringing new experiences, new perspectives, new skills, new competencies alongside those who have that well-grounded immersion in the complexities of our government system. So, Mr. President, we have before us now the senior ministers who are responsible for governance. That is the person of our Attorney General, who treats to every single thing, Mr. President, that is relevant to what we do here. Many people in the public space may assume that the role of the Attorney General is to treat principally with the police and to deal principally with issues relating to crime and government. But the role of the Office of the Attorney General covers every single aspect of governance and government across the entire country. There is not a piece of legislation, there is not a contract, there is not a lawsuit involving the government that the Office of the Attorney General does not involve. Even the simple matter of directives and COVID management protocols and their administration, those things all fall under the Office of the Attorney General. When we have a senior minister with responsibility for infrastructure coordination, Mr. President, it is the most amazing thing to watch the apparatus of government evolve across various agencies and across various ministries. A tourism project, for example, Mr. President, and the independent member, Senator Andrew Malalu, who is with us today, and I wish to welcome him formally on behalf of the government to the Senate chamber on his second outing, and I know that he is going to bring great value. Welcome, Senator Malalu. When we have tourism investment projects, for example, they come from an investor or from the private sector. They then have to find their way, Mr. President, through maybe 5, 6, 7 arms of government to have those approvals, including the culmination of town and country planning approval. And it involves the Ministry of Tourism as well, under the Tourism Development Act. Those are complex approval processes that govern infrastructure development and town and country planning processes. But they also have a direct impact, Mr. President, on our ability to engage in investment projects, for us to be able to move more smoothly through doing business indicators, Mr. President. There also is the implication for us to be able to attract investment to the country and to be able to provide jobs, both in the construction of new projects and when those projects are completed. It is also, Mr. President, the ability for us to be able to make a strong statement to the world that one investor has been so successful, or all investors have found the experience of doing business in Barbados so efficient and so effective that it is able to bring further investment to Barbados, and with it more jobs and more opportunities for Barbadians. And that, Mr. President, is critical, and that is why the Prime Minister has made the bold move to ensure that there is a senior minister sitting above all of those agencies across all of those ministries, troubleshooting and ensuring that Barbados' infrastructure agenda, especially when we are talking about a public sector investment program and significant capital works investment programs that are meant to help stimulate our economy and to ensure that our recovery is on the right track. We have also, Mr. President, a senior minister with responsibility for economic development. Now, my ministry, the Ministry of Tourism, happens to span both the productive sectors under the Honourable Minister with responsibility for small business, energy, and international business, And so we are able to work closely. And people talk about tourism all the time, and I've spoken about it in my own submission when we had the debate on the estimates. Tourism is not just about arrivals. Tourism is not just about accommodation. I spent my morning, my breakfast, well, from breakfast until now this morning with a group of media houses who are in Barbados to have a promotion with us jointly in collaboration with Sandals Barbados, to be able to promote Barbados. And they are staying with us for a week. And so we were live on radio all across Canada all morning from 7 o'clock this morning. Every single radio station in Canada is here in Barbados for the week. And we are sharing Destination Barbados. But tourism is much more than that. Tourism is about us telling them on the radio this morning, for example, that you are not just coming to stay in a hotel, but it is about the opportunities that are available when you get here. And those opportunities create opportunities in turn for small businesses. They create opportunities in turn for our tour operators. They create opportunities in turn for our taxi operators. And they were telling me about their taxi driver from the airport on Saturday when they came in, who was telling them everything about where to go in Barbados. And of course, we're the home of rum. And so they were telling them about where to go to get a rum shop tour so that they can have that authentic Barbados experience. So the senior minister with responsibility for the productive sectors sits alongside with tourism, alongside with agriculture, alongside with industry, alongside with international business, alongside with manufacturing, to ensure that the linkages and cross-correlations, what we call horizontal cooperation, takes place, even internal to government. So that when we get to cabinet every single Thursday, we have had a coherent and a coordinated approach to policy development, which then goes to the wider cabinet. It has that decentralization role. Now, Mr. President, we all saw during the course of COVID the most honorable Senator Dr. the Honorable Jerome Walcott, who ably led the Cabinet COVID subcommittee and made sure that in all of our dealings that there was a coherence. Now, many people may not know the full composition of the Cabinet COVID subcommittee, but that subcommittee, Mr. President, under the leadership of Senator Walcott, incorporated the Ministries of Health, Ministries of Tourism, Ministries of Education, and the Ministry with responsibility for Science and Technology, as well as the Ministry of Home Affairs. All of those ministries coordinated on a regular basis on the management of COVID in country. So whether it was on the issues relating to protocols and airport experiences, those things were dealt with under the Cabinet COVID subcommittee under the leadership of Senator Dr. Jerome Walcott. And so it makes perfect sense for Dr. Walcott in his role as the senior minister with responsibility for social, health, as well as sports and youth, to have that responsibility for equally coordinating across all of those ministries how we treat to policy development and to ensure that there is policy coherence among all of the various agencies under which for which he has responsibility. Equally, Mr. President, we have our Deputy Prime Minister, who we all know has responsibility on a daily basis for transport and works, but with a Prime Minister who is traveling all the time, who has international and local and regional responsibilities, who is in demand by everyone. We have to ensure that there is always a capacity for the role to be shared and that many hands make light work, and they make light work also for her. And so we have the responsibility being placed for a second person who will act in the absence of our Prime Minister, or who supports our Prime Minister when she is present, in the person of our Deputy Prime Minister. But these are just illustrative examples, Mr. President, of how the senior minister role function is structured. Now, I know it's easy, Mr. President, for people on the outside, and I think perhaps it is a Barbados Labour Party challenge. We tend to make the business of government seem easy. We went through all the things that we went through during COVID, and we were still standing. We were still out there greeting people. We were still engaging on all the matters of the day. We were still taking the country forward while dealing with the issues of COVID. And then we went into an election. And so people sometimes take for granted, because they're not exposed to what really goes into being a minister of government, and certainly what goes into being Prime Minister of a country. But I can give you the guarantee from personal experience being in this place and being in the cabinet of Barbados, as I watch my colleagues, I am so proud of my colleagues. And I want to take a moment to celebrate all of them who, over the course of the last 2 years, have stood up and served in ways that they could not have contemplated when they stepped forward in 2018. Their families and their loved ones have done without them in ways that many people cannot imagine. Whether it was I don't know if many of us have had a weekend for the last few years, because there's always something that has to be done. I know many of us, whether it is holidays, the Christmas Day, Boxing Day, New Year's Day, any single day, we are always on duty. And most times, you see people who are dealing with challenges, sometimes on the face of it, you see a problem and you assume this is the reason for the problem. But oftentimes people don't necessarily know how complex, because the way government functions, it spans across many different agencies. And I'll give one example. One example is when I talk about issues relating to the Grantley Adams International Airport. Now, the Grantley Adams International Airport and the seaport, for example, they are ecosystems. They integrate immigration, customs, private sector partners, private sector entities who are providing tours, the airport itself, the police, the drug squad, you name it. I am responsible for the airport, but I'm also responsible for coordinating an ecosystem of many players who all report to different agencies. And that is what a senior minister is now responsible for at the level of governance overall. And so many times, we've had to put out every fire. We've had to respond to every issue, every day of the week. And that has been a significant commitment on behalf of this government. We had, during the course of the election, to share, certainly with persons like the minister or former minister of health, to say, you were minister of health at the most terrible of times. You dealt with some of the most challenging of issues, but you were also a member of parliament, and you also had responsibilities for representational issues. And so the balance of striking all of those things together has been tremendous. And I want to take a moment publicly again to say to every single member of this cabinet and the cabinet of our previous term, I appreciate you. We appreciate you. You have served in an exemplary way, and you deserve to be celebrated on behalf of the people of Barbados. And it is in that context, Mr. President, that we are now rationalizing how we coordinate across government. And that is not to say that that is only the only level of coordination. Mr. President, you would have heard the submission of Senator Chantal Monroe-Knight when she spoke in the previous debate on the estimates of expenditure for 2022-2023 about our commitment for results framework, which is going to transform the way in which we do business. For example, typically you would have seen estimates, and so we're just talking about what you're going to spend on a given year. Now we are annualizing under the leadership of Professor Trivedi and the support of the Commonwealth Secretariat. We talked about it for a long time, and I think all of us are very clear that public sector reform is something that remains critical and is essential to the way in which we do business. But at the same time, we also have to be able to ensure that our people are able across the public sector, because when you see ministers, for example, ministers make policy, and as part of the separation of policy, ministers are not necessarily the ones who are executing policy. Ministers are not the ones you interact with when you go to the licensing department, for department, for example. They're not the ones with whom you are interacting. So all throughout the public service, at every single level, there must be transformation so that policy meets execution, and that Barbadians are able to benefit from that coherence. So the commitment for results framework that is being adopted means to integrate all of that into the way in which we do business. And so the combination, Mr. President, of a hierarchical structure in our cabinet, the commitment for results framework in our public service, the training of all of our boards in governance to ensure that, yes, they bring a certain level of experience, yes, they bring a certain level of skills, but also we have to ensure that in the same way that everyone that I mentioned earlier may not always understand the way the government sector works, may not always understand the way governance works. When you come to chair a board, this is not about bringing unprepared people and then training them after the fact, as I've seen in some places in the press. That's not what this is about. This is about ensuring that the mechanics of government are known to all, especially when they come to serve, because it is not something that is prepared for in your formal training or in your previous experience. And so the combination, Mr. President, of our management of state-owned enterprises through the training of our boards, the CFR framework through the level of the private sector, the public sector, and our commercial state-owned enterprises and our state-owned enterprises, plus the management and the transformation of our cabinet structure is the basis on which we are proposing that these changes do continue to be made, and it is the basis behind this, Mr. President, of the resolution which is before us, and I wish to move that with these few words, this resolution do now pass.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to start by congratulating all of those who would have been appointed to cabinet, and particularly those who would have been appointed as senior members, senior ministers, and indeed the Deputy Prime Minister. I think I spent 14 years serving as a member of a Barbados cabinet, and I know very well the challenges of service at every level and the personal toll that it takes on the individual and on the family. I've had people call, as indeed all members of cabinet, at 3 o'clock in the morning and say to you, well, I know that you're sleeping, but still a call to tell you that the dog dead, and I want, you know, something that the dog would still be dead at 9 o'clock in the morning. And you could deal with it at that time, but at 3 o'clock the dog died, and you were expected to be fully empathetic and indeed to come sometimes and hold the hand of the dog owner and so on. And for the most, and I don't say this lightly, and I don't just pull it out of my head, I am speaking from actual experience, where somebody feels overburdened, and because you are their parliamentarian, it doesn't matter what the nature of the burden is they're carrying, whether it has to do with the raising of a child or the death of a dog or the fact that they're unemployed and they need a job and they are stressed and unable to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, and therefore they feel that they can, should, and must reach out to you, and they do, and expect you to engage with them fully and to be able to lay out at least the start of some resolution of their challenge. But I want to speak to this issue, so I congratulate those who are appointed. I remember sitting, sir, in the other place during the time of my service and hearing then a very experienced politician and minister, former minister as he then was, and I speak of the Honourable Branford Tate, say that political service is the highest service and that he will always describe himself with pride as a politician. And I smiled, not fully understanding that once you serve, somebody's always going to stop you on the street to raise a personal or national issue, that they feel that you can always engage and respond to their concerns, and that really when you give of yourself at that level, you are giving to all the people of the nation without great consideration to political bias. You're serving your country, and it is great and honorable service when done well and when done sincerely. And those who are called, those whom are elected, and those who serve, I congratulate them. I had a basic rule, and it was that I had to go to bed comfortable with the person whom I saw in the mirror last thing at night when I brushed my teeth. And if every night I felt comfortable that that day I had done my best, then I went to bed happy. I knew that that day I could not have pleased everybody and I could not have satisfied every demand, but if I had done my best and by far and large had dealt with the concerns, then I was happy. But I move, so I don't want this to be an anecdotal commentary. I do want to make some points relative to the appointment of the Deputy Prime Ministers and the senior ministers. The appointment of a deputy prime minister is within the absolute discretion of a prime minister. Who that person is and whether or not there should be such a post really is the prime minister's choice. And in fact, it is not a post that is identified or called for in the Constitution. It has emerged as a matter of practice over the years. And one might think that for succession or other purposes, it does have good optics. It tends to make a country far more comfortable that somebody is identified as deputy prime minister. And therefore, insofar as it is not my choice, I will not comment except to congratulate the deputy prime minister and to wish her well. She has served with distinction despite having a very serious personal illness, which the country was fully aware of, and she did not resile from her responsibilities. And you have to accept that she is a person, therefore, of tremendous capacity, intellectually, physically, and of goodwill. Her intention to serve the country is paramount. But I want to speak to the Prime Minister's choosing not of the individuals, but of a policy decision to have senior coordinating ministers. It is the first time that we are seeing it in Barbados. Prior to this, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, though it has been a tradition in the Commonwealth, there was before now only one person ever having been identified as senior minister, Dame the Honorable Billy Millard, and she served in that capacity and again served well. But while she was styled senior minister, she did not have a coordinating responsibility, which we now see fall on the shoulders of 4 people. And I find it an extremely interesting development because it really begs the question, how are we as a nation, how are we as a republic reorganizing our governance and strengthening our systems of governance so that they can deliver for the people of Barbados? We know what a minister is. We know what the structure of a cabinet is. We know how a cabinet is supposed to perform. How within that construct do you reconstruct the elements so as to deliver better value to the citizenry and so that the nation is better served? And I want to start with it identifying this as a mechanism for strengthening implementation in the structure and system of government. Often one hears policy articulated or promises made. And while it is the politicians who articulate and bear the responsibility and the blame when there is not delivery, there is often a tremendous gap between the policy intention and the policy implementation. And it is not the politicians who are responsible for the actual day-to-day implementation. And therefore, I see this as a measure intended to structure and deliver on implementation and on the commitments made, the policy commitments made in the manifesto which the Barbados Labour Party presented to the public of Barbados in the last election. This means that the ministers do actually have to coordinate, that they actually have these senior ministers to work with strategic plans. They are responsible for broad areas: governance, business development, social and environmental matters, and infrastructure planning and development. These coordinate with the strategic objectives of the Barbados Labour Party policy as laid out in the estimates and as highlighted and reinforced in the budget that was presented to the country over the course of the last few weeks. And therefore, how do you get ministries to better function? It is amazing to me that you allocate a vote, let's say, to a ministry of public works, but and each of them has supervisors responsible for particular areas. But you drive into communities where there are potholes in the roads, where drainage grills are dropping in. You walk up Roebuck Street, and there are potholes in the sidewalk. You see people put cones, those red cones or orange cones in them. You see people put cans and other things to flag that there is a danger. And I'm citing this not as a criticism, even though it is, of the Ministry of Public Works, but to point to the reality of the problems with implementation, even when there is budgetary allocation, and how it is going to become important for senior ministers to strengthen coordination and management and implementation at that level. So if you and I drive up Broad Street or Roebuck Street or in communities, and we see these cones, we see the flags, we see the barrels, don't the supervisors who are responsible for these particular areas see them and feel that they should act on them? Or are they driving around or walking around a different Barbados? And that is really the reality of implementation in government. The politicians are being cursed, or as we would say, getting abused real bad for these particular problems. But there are issues relative to how we manage resources. There are issues relative to how we deploy our human resources. And there are issues relative to how people at the supervisory level and management level, whether it's middle management or senior level, senior management level, perceive themselves as agents of policy implementation and agents of effecting transformational change in the areas in which they are working. And if we could get past this, if we could get past the point where Barbados Water Authority opens up the place 1 week, and next week, and close it, visit back, and next week MPC comes back and opens it up again. If we can get to the point where there is cooperation, conversation, first of all, between these implementation agencies, and then coordination and collaboration, not only would we save a significant amount of money, but the country would be better served. And things that appear simple and are in fact simple, but constitute significant irritants and sometimes risks. Because you can fall in, I've had a tire damaged, lost a whole tire, dropping into a pothole that I did not see. People have fallen on these sidewalks where there are holes that capture women's high heels. People have tripped and stumped their toes and fallen and injured themselves because the paving was not even. And so in negotiating, because your eye doesn't necessarily pick up as you move, in negotiating the change in grade, you don't pick it up and you stumble and so on. So these are things, and I'm just citing these. I'm not picking these ministries out for blame, but to flag them as the kinds of issues that really annoy and upset citizens, which can be much better managed than they currently are. In relation to infrastructure, this is going to be a significant coordination role. The manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party 2022 points to $122 million in infrastructural projects to be executed by the public sector and $1.4 billion in infrastructural projects to be executed by the private sector. And significantly, all of these are projects which were already approved and do not represent other projects that are to come on stream and are now going through the pipeline to get to the point of approval. Now, this is where the coordination becomes significant. Someone has to take a helicopter oversight of what is happening relative to these projects. Because unless that happens and unless government manages this process well, it can be bare confusion about here, sir, to use a Barbadian expression. And if I can then use the language more acceptable in this chamber, it will cause significant challenges at the national level, sir, social and economic. It may appear a simple thing, but unless there is, for instance, adequate knowledge of how many blocks need to be produced to satisfy demand in the marketplace for these mega projects, as well as for little Miss Bishop, who just want to add on a little garage to her house. Because not only will these projects either drive constraints in the marketplace in terms of shortages, but they will drive prices upward as demand heats up if the supply cannot match the level of demand. And therefore, some coordination, which projects are going to come on stream when, which projects are located where, and the impact that is going to have on traversing the roads because of the number of large delivery vehicles, whether it is cement trucks or other vehicles, which are going to clutter up a particular area at school time, so that other people can't get to work, people can't get to school. These things may appear simple, but they do need coordination and oversight, because we have allowed them before to just happen and to evolve in an organic way, or as if we determine that that is what will happen, without any coordination, when in fact, if the nature of these projects, because they're so large and so many, are to be well done and to meet the timelines, then it is critical that there should be oversight. Already there are complaints, and I think Senator Nurse spoke about this, about how long it is taking to get approvals for renewable energy hookups. That may be a loose language, sir, but at the moment I'm not knowing what the correct language is, but it is taking a very long time to get approvals, and people put the systems in. I think the Honorable Senator Malulu spoke to that as well last week. The systems are put in, and people wait a year, 2 years, and are not getting the approvals. If more projects come on stream, then it is going to be much harder to get that pipeline of approvals out. It means, sir, that there has to be a serious analysis of what is our human resource capacity within the government. What skill sets do we have? What is the optimal size of the various agencies that are going to be managing these processes and these projects? And unless we can deal with these things, then there will be significant challenges. And they can only be dealt with in the context of coordination and collaboration between the senior ministers, and then for the ministries to operate in a less siloed way, as if they are all interconnected, doing one job for the government and the people of Barbados. In the area of business development, again, this speaks to the issues highlighted in the budget and the estimates. Ease of doing business, economic enfranchisement. We know that the tremendous emphasis is being paid to the renewable energy sector, to the whole concept and context of owning our Barbados, to the constituent elements that will make ownership possible for people at every socio-economic level. But most of all, the extent to which renewable energy is going to be leveraged to transform the economic fortunes of families who now live in poverty, but who can expect disposable income and revenues to be generated for them, perhaps in perpetuity, coming out of this new policy approach. Hence, those kinds of issues, the economic issues, the business issues, the economic enfranchisement. And so one of the things that COVID spawned, though it was perhaps not an intentional one, because we have seen both positive and negative impacts of COVID. The negative impacts are obvious, but Senator Malulu in his maiden speech last week spoke to the fact that there were, he didn't want to say that there were some COVID millionaires, but that some persons had made a significant amount of money doing testing or performing other services in and around COVID. Equally, sir, there has been a spike, and it is a good thing, in various types of entrepreneurship. Young men, particularly, and girls, young women, trading online, doing online investments of various types. Even people who are not seen as traditional investors. There have been people using the virtual platforms for various kinds of businesses. Wherever you go in every community, young people have become vendors, whether it is vendors of clothes, vendors of various essentials, vendors of various kinds of things. You have people engaging in entrepreneurship or of one type or another. And the manifesto seeks to build entrepreneurship not just at the cultural level, but all classes of entrepreneurship. And that received a further boost by the fact that the grant is now available to those, a $5,000 loan, beg your pardon, to enable entrepreneurship. And where there is business interruption for the first time, people who are self-employed can actually claim, which makes it a lot easier. There is cushion for you as you execute and carry out your business. So the notion that there is going to be greater support and greater coordination, not just coordination, but that there will be an actual guiding and direction of the process in order to foster higher levels of entrepreneurship. Societies that have become entrepreneurial tend to do very well. It has been one of the major platforms on which the United States economy is built. And it is amazing how businesses like Amazon, Microsoft started with, well, not Amazon so much because the CEO of Amazon, or the founder of Amazon, was already established as, I think, he was a financial expert. But if you look at how Microsoft and some of the other businesses started, small entrepreneurial enterprises in the garages of their parents in some instances. And so there are a lot of businesses being started now in Barbados. And while we are focused, because of our size, on micro and small enterprises, I don't know what we call medium-sized enterprises in the context of Barbados, because in the global context, our business here is micro and small. But the point is this, that with the technology platforms available today, that the scope of a young Barbadian entrepreneur, their market is a global market. Whether they are singing calypso, whether they are chanting, if they are making food, whatever it is, the market for the first time is, the global market is accessible to them without having to move through the formal processes that existed before as a middleman and a barrier. They can sell directly to the consumer. So if Barbados is going to become a more entrepreneurial society, as the manifesto contemplates, and as the estimates and the budget contemplate, then it must be critical to have a coordinating minister at that level. Then there is the issue of governance. For some considerable time, we have been stymied, I think, by governance issues. Auditor General's report after Auditor General's report points to inefficiencies, mismanagement, resource wastage, etc. Well, I should not say etc., and matters of that ilk in his reports. But they continue. So how do we strengthen state-owned enterprises so that they become stronger entities, more efficient, deliver better for the public, and are not a burden on government? Because rather, many state-owned enterprises are not profitable entities, whether it is the Transport Board or the NCC, and I could point to others. Those are just two examples. They exist largely because of subventions by government, and running effectively, running efficiently, and running cost effectively has not been, over the years, it would appear to me, a primary consideration. But it now has to be, because these are very resource-constrained times. And therefore, we would want to see our SOEs function much better than they have in the past. So this issue of governance, both, sorry, I thought you were going to signal, both internally at the central government and externally at the level of the SOEs or state-owned enterprises is of extreme importance. The manifesto also speaks to the issue of greater accountability within the context of the civil service. Who is responsible for what? When there are breaches so that the public trust or the public need is not well served, who takes accountability for that? What form does that accountability take? Who reports to whom, and when there is a problem, who challenges the person who has failed to deliver? These are issues that we have to discuss. What are the issues of productivity in the context of the public sector? Because we speak all the time about increasing salaries, improving benefits and conditions, which I support completely. But at the same time, the public must and should have improved service for these improved conditions and improved salaries. The manifesto speaks, sir, to these issues with some clarity and in some detail when it talks about delivering for all, that government must deliver for all, where it contemplates the reform of several agencies or structures in the context of government, chief among them being the social services and the welfare system. And the Senator Roberts-Odell spoke very eloquently to why social reform must take place and what should be the structure and the outcome of that social reform. And I don't repeat, I merely endorse her own comments, which were very, very perceptive, born out of some personal experience on this matter. What we must see is strategic, people-centered leadership. That is the language that the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party uses. Because often when you go into government agencies and you are on the receiving end of government goods or services, you do not necessarily get the impression that the person who is delivering thinks of you as their customer, A, and B, their valued customer. If some of them look up from what they're doing, you are lucky. I remember going into Barbados Water Authority and trying to get a bill sorted. And I gave my name and I gave the various forms of it. H. Elizabeth Thompson, Henrietta Thompson, Liz Thompson, and they told me they didn't have me on the system. And I said, but sweetheart, I pay the bill every month. Surely you do have me on the system. And after great agitation, somebody said, the woman about here says something, and so on, and they were referring to me. And eventually somebody helped me, and they said to me, and that's how they refer you, the man that come through the door just now says so. You know, not the gentleman who came in this morning, or customer here, or so. There's no customer service ethic or perception in many agencies. I'm not saying everybody is guilty of it. In many agencies, and the way they treat to you, the way they speak to you. I love to go in government offices where I'm not recognized and see what the experience of the average Barbadian is. And on that day, I was eventually located at the Barbados Water Authority, I'm happy to tell you. And the young lady announced to me that the problem was that I was not H. Elizabeth Thompson, as I was saying, but I was H. Elizabeth Thompson, and that is why they could not find me. And the problem was with my name. And I said to her, thank you very much, I'll let my mother know. And of course, my response was totally lost on her, but I chuckled at my own joke and thanked her for helping me and got it sorted. So a customer service ethic, a national customer service ethic, really is of extreme importance. And how do we get those who come into the government service whose tenure of office is not necessarily dependent on how they treat people, if they deliver efficiently, if their office is profitable or not? How do we get them to perceive that the person who comes through the door, the Barbadian just like them? I mean, I could give you stories all day. I had a very interesting experience with a guard at Barbados Licensing Authority who was in a personal conversation, and I said, excuse me, please, can you tell me where I could go for so-and-so? She looked at me as if I had offended her terribly, and she pointed in a particular direction. And then I said, thank you very much, and I went to the place where I was told to stand up, and I'm standing there. And I came back to her and I said, well, could you indicate how long the wait time might be? Because, you know, I'm in Barbados for a very short time, and I really need to get this done. Can you point to me out and say, you've got to wait. You can't wait. And I assured her that, yes, I did know how to wait, and I went back to my spot in the line. And eventually somebody came to her and said, do you have any idea who that is? And she said, who? And the person whispered my name. So, look, I in charge of down here, and you in charge of out there. You go back where you belong and left me to do what you're doing. And that was the end of the matter. So I stood quietly in the line. And after I'd been there for some considerable time, because I was leaving the country the next day, and I needed to have my driver's license to take back to New York, somebody who was a supervisor came over and said, Ambassador Thompson, may I be of assistance? And I explained what I wanted, and they took it from me. But that should not have happened, because what I encountered was the experience of everyone who went there, who was standing in the line for hours, not knowing when they would be seen, not understanding what the process was, no signs of direction. And she was very upset that anybody was interrupting her personal conversation. And so I think I have covered all of the areas, social and environmental matters, and you know that social and environmental matters have become very much a major plank of the new entrepreneurial and policy imperatives of this administration. In terms of governance, the issue of local government will be held by the Thorne Commission. The parliamentary reform will be covered by Sir Richard Cheltenham. So there is much that is intended to happen in the area of governance. I didn't make the point just now, but perhaps should have, that just as COVID struck, in my role as ambassador, I had negotiated with the ambassador of Singapore for Barbadian civil servants to go to Singapore for training, and for Singapore to send training leaders to Barbados to do training en masse here, because they have an excellent reputation for their civil service and social culture, civil service culture and service culture. And I very much hope that in the course of time, COVID interrupted it, but that we can get back to that and that it can be delivered. So the whole issue of governance is an important one. Social and environmental issues, business development, and the areas, infrastructural development. I spoke to that and strengthening town planning, and I did speak to the area of implementation. And the housing issues really fall under social and economic and infrastructural, and the points that I made relative to the exigencies of the demand and the role are valid. I close on the point, sir, that this really isn't just, as some people would think, there's been some political commentary trying to elevate some amongst the cabinet. It is really trying to evolve new governance systems and structures that better deliver to the people of Barbados. Because government must deliver for all, and government must become people-centered. And the people for whom government goods, services, operations must be centered are those who seek those goods and services, whether there are Barbadians or non-Barbadians, whether there are persons inside Barbados or outside Barbados, whether there are diaspora or others who have no Barbadian links at all. And the people who work in the system must also feel that they are respected, that space too is created for them. They must know, be able to perform and be proud of their role delivering for the people of Barbados. This is about this structure which the Prime Minister has put in place, is about evolving a stronger, better governance for the people of Barbados, so that the policy framework of the government and the transformational policy contemplated by the government can be delivered to all effectively, efficiently, and well. And with that, I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, Senator Thompson. And the speakers, Senator Cummings. Oh, sorry, Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I shall be brief, just a few very little comments. I support the resolution, Mr. President. I think that any government obviously has the right to organize its administration in the way it best sees fit. And I think that in this case, if government is confident, if government is sure that by going this route of adding this other layer of senior ministers will assist in making government more efficient and in creating the environment in which the opportunity to improve doing business in Barbados, then I think that is fine, and you can't argue with that. If, on the other hand, it ends up where you end up creating other layers of administration, creating additional costs of running the government, then obviously, in my view, it will not be effective. And so my only concern really would be to be comfortable that in going about the route which the government has gone, you are not just creating additional layers of administration. I know and we all know how complex and cumbersome, perhaps is the more, is a better word, the organs of government can be, and how things are slowed down working in government. For example, Mr. President, if one is to put in an application to the town planning department, for example, now before an approval or disapproval of the whole application can be done, it is normal for the for the town planning department to consult probably with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Transport and Works, the Environmental Protection Division, the Coastal Zone Management Unit. And depending, of course, on the type of development, there could be other departments. And the point is that the ease with which the town planning can then do its final thing, having gone through all these levels of consultations, and to decide on the issue really depends on how easy it is to get that opinion out of all of these other departments. And so I would like to, it would be interesting to understand how this coordination is going to is going to work in those circumstances. I am not sure that I fully grasp how all of this will work, but as I say, if at the end of the day these senior ministers can end up being in a position to get all of these various departments over a number of ministries to function in a much more efficient manner, and to be able to understand and to appreciate the importance of various projects and the urgency to have these projects going, then I think it is all worth it. It is worth it. But as I said, I have my concerns. What very often happens is that you have these issues not at the level of a minister, but really at the level of the civil service function, where these various functions, the professional functions, the professional opinions and so on, have to be done and have to be fed on to the cabinet in order to be able, for government, for the cabinet to be able to make decisions. And so all I'm saying is, if by adding this level of administration, that things can improve, that we see an improvement in doing business in Barbados, then I would certainly be happy, and I would congratulate the government on taking this step. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I know that Senator Nurse would have joined the chamber a little bit after we began, but I believe that in my introduction of the resolution, I gave a comprehensive review of how we were treating to the role of the coordinating ministers and the senior ministers. I gave a comprehensive review of how that was treating, how we were also proposing as an administration to treat to the commitment for results framework, which was spoken about by Senator Chantal Monroe Knight and in the estimates debate. I talked about how this is going to treat to the coordination between policy and execution at the implementation level. And I'm hopeful that perhaps during the course of the coming days, when you have an opportunity, we can review that detailed elaboration from the Parliament records, but also we're happy to continue to share how it's meant to work. However, at this point, Mr. President, I would wish to indicate that we are committed to ensuring that the services that are meant to be provided to the people of Barbados by the government of Barbados are provided in a way that is transformational. We accept that there are changes that need to be made, and we commit to having them made in an all-of-government approach. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Question is that this resolution do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Mr. President, that brings us to the end of government's business for today, and I beg to move that the Senate do be adjourned. Sine die.
Speaking on the adjournment, I want to take this opportunity to thank Clerk of Parliament Pedro Eastman and his team for the arrangements which have been implemented. Several observations were made concerning the previous arrangements, and the conversations with the clerk and his team. We were able to work through some permutations and combinations, and I trust that the particular iteration that we have settled upon is pleasing to all senators. It certainly has been pleasing to me, and I want to say thank you, Pedro, Nigel, Beverly, and team. You know the pressure you're under. There's still much work to be done in other aspects of the renovation. We want to thank you for ensuring that the Honourable Senate and its members have been able to meet all of the protocol requirements, as well as any other concerns, but we are able to proceed with our business efficaciously in safety as well as in comfort, while still respecting the architectural integrity of the arrangements here in the Senate. So I want to thank you very much for that, and thank you, Honourable Senators, for raising some matters with me, as well as your patience and understanding as we sought to put these arrangements in place. The question is that the Senate do now adjourn. Sine die. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senate stands adjourned.